Every single day, your heart is fighting a war you can't feel, can't see, and almost certainly don't know is happening inside you. Right now, as you read this, pressure is traveling through every artery in your body, pushing against vessel walls in your brain, squeezing through the tiny blood vessels feeding your kidneys, and hammering against the chambers of your heart with every single beat. And here's what makes this terrifying. There is no alarm, no pain, no warning signal. Your body doesn't flinch. It just quietly absorbs the damage year after year until one day something gives out. A blood vessel bursts in your brain. A coronary artery collapses. A kidney quietly stops working. And the doctors stand over you and call it a sudden event. Except it wasn't sudden at all. It was decades in the making, driven by something you were eating every single day. Something nobody ever warned you about. Something the entire health system spent 50 years blaming on the wrong cause entirely. I spent years working in emergency medicine, watching people arrive on stretchers after strokes they didn't see coming, after heart attacks that hit them completely without warning, after years of being told their blood pressure was being managed, being told to watch their salt, being given medication and sent home, only to end up in front of me anyway. And what I learned from being on that front line is something that most people never get told in a 10-minute GP appointment. The advice you've been following might be protecting you from the wrong thing. Because the real driver of chronic high blood pressure in most people has almost nothing to do with how much salt you put on your food, and everything to do with something else entirely. Something that happens inside your body every single time you eat a specific type of food that most of us consume multiple times a day without a second thought. Before I tell you what that is, you need to understand something fundamental about how blood pressure actually works in the human body. Because once you understand the mechanism, everything else clicks into place, and you'll never think about this problem the same way again. Your blood pressure is controlled by three things and three things only. The first is how forcefully your heart is pumping. The second is how much total fluid is circulating through your vessels. The third is how tight or relaxed your arteries are at any given moment. Think of it like water running through a hose. If you pump more water in, pressure rises. If you squeeze the hose tighter, pressure rises. If you flood the system with more fluid than it can comfortably carry, pressure rises. And your body has incredibly sophisticated systems for managing all three of those variables. Your autonomic nervous system controls heart rate and force. Your kidneys control fluid volume by deciding how much sodium and water to hold onto or let go of. And the inner lining of your arteries, a thin, one-cell thick layer called the endothelium, produces a molecule called nitric oxide that tells your vessels to relax and open up, dropping resistance and keeping pressure in a safe range. When all three of those systems are working properly together, your blood pressure stays stable even when you eat a salty meal, even when you have a stressful day, even when you run a sprint. The system compensates and corrects and balances itself beautifully. But when one of those systems starts malfunctioning, and especially when two or three start breaking down at the same time, the whole regulatory architecture falls apart. And your pressure climbs and it stays there, and the damage accumulates silently for years. Now here's where salt enters the picture, and here's also where the story gets more complicated than what we've been told for the past 5 decades. Salt raises blood pressure through a very direct, very mechanical route. Sodium is osmotically active, which is a scientific way of saying that water is attracted to it like a magnet. When you eat a salty meal, sodium flows into your bloodstream, and your body immediately tries to dilute that sodium to maintain a safe concentration. It does this by pulling water from surrounding tissues into your blood vessels, which expands the total volume of fluid in your circulatory system. More fluid, more pressure. Simple physics. And for some people, particularly those with genetic predispositions or compromised kidney function, this effect is powerful and clinically significant. Reducing salt for those people genuinely moves the needle. But here's what 50 years of salt-focused public health advice has been quietly ignoring. For the majority of people, particularly those who are insulin resistant, which in the modern world now describes most middle-aged adults, the kidneys are not responding to salt intake the way they're supposed to. They're not adjusting based on what you eat. They're being overridden by a hormonal signal that has nothing to do with sodium at all. And that signal comes from insulin. Insulin is the hormone your pancreas releases every time your blood sugar rises, which happens every time you eat carbohydrates or sugar. And most people know that insulin's job is to get glucose out of the blood and into your cells. What almost nobody knows is that insulin has a second job that operates completely in parallel, completely separately, and with dramatic consequences for blood pressure. Insulin signals your kidneys to retain sodium, not because you've eaten salt, not because your sodium levels are too low, but simply because insulin is present in your bloodstream. This is not a side effect. This is a fundamental physiological function of insulin that researchers have understood for decades, but that somehow never made it into public health messaging around blood pressure. When insulin rises after a meal, your kidneys get a direct hormonal instruction to hold on to sodium. And when sodium stays in, water follows. Blood volume expands and pressure rises. Now, in a metabolically healthy person, this is a temporary, self-correcting process. Insulin goes up after a meal, the kidneys briefly retain a little extra sodium, and then insulin drops back to baseline as glucose gets cleared from the blood, and the kidneys release that sodium and pressure normalizes. Clean, elegant, self-regulating. But here's where it all breaks down for the majority of people living on a modern diet. When you eat processed food regularly, when your diet is built around refined carbohydrates, bread, pasta, cereals, crackers, packaged snacks, sweetened drinks, your blood sugar spikes multiple times a day, your pancreas churns out insulin in response each time, and over months and years your cells start ignoring insulin's signal. They become resistant to it. And so your pancreas has to produce more insulin just to get the same effect on blood sugar. The result is that insulin levels in your bloodstream are chronically elevated, not just after meals but throughout the day, sometimes even overnight. And because insulin never drops to a true resting baseline, your kidneys never get the signal to stop retaining sodium. They're locked into retention mode around the clock. This means that even if you eat a low-sodium diet, even if you eliminate the salt shaker completely, even if you follow every piece of dietary advice your doctor gives you, your kidneys are still holding on to sodium because of the hormonal environment your diet has created. You can't out-salt restrict a hormonal problem. And it goes even further than that, because sugar and refined carbohydrates are also doing damage through a second, completely separate pathway that directly attacks the third arm of your blood pressure regulation system. Fructose, which is found in table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, fruit juice, and almost every sweetened processed food on the market, is metabolized almost entirely in your liver. And when your liver breaks down fructose, one of the byproducts is uric acid. Elevated uric acid in the bloodstream doesn't just cause gout. It actively attacks the endothelium, that thin inner lining of your arteries that produces nitric oxide. When uric acid levels are chronically high, nitric oxide production falls. Your arteries lose their ability to relax and dilate in response to pressure, they stiffen and constrict, and resistance climbs. Which means your heart has to push harder just to get the same amount of blood through your body. So now you have insulin chronically elevated, telling your kidneys to hold on to sodium, expanding blood volume. And simultaneously, you have damaged endothelium, producing less nitric oxide, leaving your arteries stiff and resistant. That is 2 out of the 3 levers of blood pressure being pushed in the wrong direction at the same time, every single day, by the food most people eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and every snack in between. And the advice most people get is to use less salt. Think about that for a moment. While your kidneys are being held hostage by insulin and your arteries are being chemically stiffened by uric acid, the clinical response for decades has been to tell people to put down the salt shaker. No wonder hypertension rates have continued climbing despite every public health campaign. We've been pouring water on a fire that's burning underground. The real combustion is hormonal. The real damage is metabolic. And the fix is not achieved by removing one mineral from your diet. It's achieved by restoring the biological conditions that allow your entire pressure regulation system to function the way it was designed to, which means reducing the insulin burden on your kidneys by cutting the foods that spike blood sugar most aggressively. It means protecting your endothelium from the daily bombardment of fructose-derived uric acid by stepping away from processed sugar and sweetened beverages. It means moving your body regularly, because aerobic exercise stimulates your blood vessel walls in a way that directly increases nitric oxide production and keeps your arteries elastic and responsive. It means sleeping properly and deeply, because poor sleep elevates the sympathetic nervous system, which constricts vessels and raises heart rate and keeps your pressure up through the night when it should be falling. It means eating foods that are naturally rich in potassium, which counterbalances sodium in the kidneys and supports vascular relaxation, because the modern processed diet has quietly stripped potassium out of most people's daily intake, while flooding them with sodium and refined carbohydrates simultaneously. Processed food is not just unhealthy in a vague, generic sense. It is specifically mechanically, pharmacologically designed to break your blood pressure regulation system at multiple points at once. It hits your plasma volume through sodium, It locks your kidneys into retention mode through refined carbohydrates and insulin. It stiffens your arteries through fructose and uric acid. And it depletes the potassium your body needs to course correct. It is a perfect biological storm served to you in a colorful box with a health claim on the label. And most people eating it 3 times a day have no idea any of this is happening inside them. This is what nobody tells you. Not because doctors don't care, but because the system isn't designed to explain mechanisms. It's designed to prescribe treatments. And the treatments work, in the sense that they bring the numbers down. ACE inhibitors reduce the hormonal signals that constrict vessels. Diuretics force the kidneys to release sodium. Calcium channel blockers relax arterial smooth muscle. All effective. All genuinely life-saving in the right context. But none of them fix why the pressure was elevated in the first place. The moment you stop taking them, if nothing else has changed, the pressure comes back. Because the metabolic environment that drove it up is still there. Still operating. Still sending the wrong signals to your kidneys and your arteries every single day. The patients I saw make real, lasting change. The ones who came back for follow-ups with pressure readings that had genuinely transformed were not the ones who had simply switched to a low-sodium diet. They were the ones who had fundamentally changed the hormonal conversation happening inside their bodies. They had cut the refined carbohydrates that were keeping their insulin chronically elevated. They had replaced processed food with whole food that came with fiber to slow glucose absorption and potassium to support sodium excretion. They had started moving consistently, not to burn calories, but because their arteries were finally being given the mechanical stimulus they needed to produce nitric oxide again. They had fixed their sleep, and as a result, their kidneys started responding to actual sodium intake again, rather than being overridden by hormonal signals. Their arteries started relaxing the way arteries are supposed to. Their cardiac output stopped being artificially driven up by a sympathetic nervous system running hot from sugar, processed food, sleep deprivation, and chronic insulin elevation. Their blood pressure came down, not because they managed it, but because they addressed the conditions that had broken the system in the first place. That is the difference between controlling a disease and reversing one. And if your blood pressure is elevated, if you've been told to watch your salt and you're doing that and nothing is changing, this is why. You are not failing. The advice you were given was incomplete. It addressed one part of a 3-part system, while ignoring the 2 parts that are almost certainly driving your problem in the modern metabolic environment we all live in. Understanding this doesn't make medication unnecessary. For many people, medication is essential and genuinely life-saving and should absolutely be taken seriously. But understanding this does mean that medication works best, works with lower doses, and works most durably when the underlying metabolic drivers are also being addressed. The numbers on the machine tell you that your pressure is high. They don't tell you which part of the system is broken. And if you don't know which part is broken, you can't fix it. Now you know, and knowing this changes everything about the choices you make from this point forward.